It was a cold January morning in 1972. At the door of the psychology department of Stockholm University, an unusual visitor appeared. 5-year-old Elias Lindberg and his mother Maria had arrived without an appointment. The anxiety etched across Maria's face immediately caught the attention of the department secretary. The woman spoke in a trembling voice. "My son is not normal. Please help him." Within minutes, Professor Anders Nilsson was introduced to the small child. At first glance, Elias looked no different from any typical Swedish boy: blue eyes, blonde hair. But when he began to speak, everyone in the room froze. The 5-year-old was fluently explaining theories of physics, writing complex mathematical formulas, and reciting from memory the coordinates of star systems not yet discovered. Even more astonishing was Elias's claim that he had not learned any of this anywhere. "They tell me while I sleep," the child said. This unexpected visit would reverberate through the scientific world and mark the beginning of a long research project that would come to be known as the Elias case. This child, arriving from a small Swedish town, would shake to its foundations our understanding of the nature of intelligence, the capacity of the human brain, and consciousness itself. A child's extraordinary world. Maria Lindberg lived alone with her young son on the outskirts of the northern Swedish city of Kiruna. A former astronomy assistant, Maria had left her academic career after becoming pregnant and chosen a life closer to nature. Elias's father had vanished before the child was born. Maria rarely spoke of him. "He went somewhere far away," was all she would say. From the day of his birth, Elias was a different kind of child. As early as 3 months old, he tracked moving objects with his eyes and spent long periods gazing at the night sky. At 6 months, he spoke his first words, early even for a normal infant. But that first word was neither mama nor papa. It was Andromeda. Maria had initially connected this to her own astronomy background and her habit of frequently talking to the baby about the stars. But when Elias reached the age of 1, he was speaking in complete sentences. At 2, he could perform basic arithmetic. At 3, he had started reading his mother's old astronomy books. By 4, he was conducting his own astronomical calculations and writing the results in a notebook. Maria watched her son's development with a mixture of pride and growing unease. That Elias's intelligence was exceptional was obvious, but this pace of progress was far beyond anything normal. His nocturnal behavior was also cause for concern. The child frequently talked in his sleep, sometimes murmuring for hours in unrecognizable languages, writing what appeared to be meaningless symbols and equations. Maria had consulted local doctors. They too were at a loss. "Your son is extraordinarily intelligent," they had said. "Perhaps even a genius. You should provide him with appropriate educational opportunities." But Maria knew this was not simply a matter of exceptional intelligence. The source of her son's knowledge was coming from somewhere, and that source could be explained neither by ordinary education nor by environmental factors. And so it was that on that cold January morning, Maria had made her way to Stockholm University as a last resort. An old colleague had mentioned Professor Anders Nilsson's work in child psychology and the study of exceptional intelligence. Perhaps he could explain what was happening with Elias. The first encounter. Professor Nilsson was a calm, methodical scientist in his 50s. He was well regarded across the Scandinavian countries for his work in child psychology and particularly respected for his research on gifted children. But when the small boy walked through his door that morning, all his scientific certainty was shaken. Elias sat down in the chair across from the professor's desk. His small feet didn't reach the floor. His blue eyes surveyed the room with curiosity. He focused particularly on the brain models and the astronomical posters on the walls. "Hello, Elias," said Professor Nilsson, leaning slightly forward to meet the child's eye level. "Your mother tells me you are very clever. Would you like to tell me a little about yourself?" Elias nodded with a childlike smile. "Hello, Professor. Yes, I know some things, but I didn't learn all of them myself. They tell me." "They?" said Nilsson, raising an eyebrow. "Who are they, Elias?" "I don't know," said the child with a shrug. "I can't see them. I only hear their voices. They come while I'm sleeping and they tell me things. about stars, about numbers, about the universe. Maria was accustomed to her son making these kinds of statements, but she could see the expression of astonishment on Nielsen's face. He first told me about it when he was 3, she explained. He would wake in the morning full of information he had never encountered before. And that information is correct, at least as far as I have been able to verify. Professor Nielsen reached for the notepad on his desk. Elias, could you show me something of what you've been learning? Elias nodded eagerly. The professor handed him a pen and paper. Without a moment's hesitation, the child began writing a complex series of mathematical equations. Nielsen recognized them. They were the fundamental equations of Einstein's theory of relativity. But Elias didn't stop there. He began to develop the equations further, to modify them, in ways that even Nielsen found difficult to follow. This is extraordinary, the professor murmured. Elias, where did you learn these equations? I told you, said Elias with a trace of impatience, as though he were repeating something obvious. They told me at night, and they've told me much more. Look! Elias took a fresh sheet of paper and began drawing a series of stars and planets. Beside each one, he wrote what appeared to be a set of coordinates. This is a new star system, he explained. It hasn't been discovered yet, but it's there, and there is life within it. Nielsen and Maria stared at one another in astonishment. Elias, said the professor carefully, how do you know these coordinates? They told me, said the child, as though no other answer were conceivable. And they've told me a great deal more. There's so much that people don't know yet, Professor. The universe is very large, and we are very small. That first meeting lasted more than 2 hours. Throughout, Elias demonstrated extraordinary knowledge in physics, astronomy, mathematics, and even philosophy. But the most striking thing of all was that the child was unable to explain how he came by any of it. I learn while I sleep, he kept saying. They tell me. At the end of the meeting, Professor Nielsen was both electrified and deeply confused. Mrs. Lindbergh, he said, your son is truly exceptional. I would like to conduct a series of tests to better understand his situation. With your permission, I would like to include Elias in a special program within our psychology department. Maria hesitated. What kind of tests? They won't harm him? Absolutely not, Nielsen assured her. Standard intelligence tests, memory assessments, perception tests, all completely safe procedures. Our aim is to understand how Elias's mind works and to determine how we can best help him. After a long silence, Maria nodded. Very well, but on one condition. I will be with him at all times, and if anything troubles me, we will have the right to withdraw from the program. Of course, said the professor. This work is entirely voluntary. You are free to leave at any time. And so the investigation that would come to be known as the Elias case officially began. The investigation begins. Professor Nielsen immediately assembled a research team. Dr. Sophia Bergman, a child psychologist, Dr. Eric Johansson, an educational psychologist, Dr. Mia Lundquist, an astronomer, and Dr. Thomas Erickson, a physicist. The team was tasked with examining Elias's situation from every angle. The first tests were standard IQ and cognitive assessments. The results exceeded all expectations. Elias's IQ was beyond the measurable limits. In the early 1970s, the Stanford Binet test was capped at 160 points, and Elias had achieved a perfect score. These results surpass the highest IQ levels we know of, said Johansson, studying the test results. But what astonishes me most is which domains he excels in. Most gifted children stand out in a particular area, mathematics, music, language, but Elias is extraordinary across every field, and his breadth of knowledge is simply impossible for a 5-year-old child. The brain examinations available with the technology of that era were limited, but the team did everything within their means. Using the newly developing technique of electroencephalography, Elias's brain waves were recorded. After examining the results, Dr. Bergman turned to the rest of the team. Look at this, she said. It's extraordinary. Elias's brainwaves show a level of activity that is simply not seen in children, particularly the synchronization in the alpha and theta bands. This is a pattern rarely observed even in adults in a state of deep meditation. But the most astonishing discovery came at night. The research team arranged for Elias to spend the night at the laboratory so that his brain activity during sleep could be monitored. Maria slept beside her son so that the child would feel safe. Around midnight, unusual activity began to register on the monitoring equipment. Elias's brain waves deviated dramatically from normal sleep patterns, displaying extremely high-frequency activity. At the same time, the child began stirring in his bed and murmuring what sounded like incomprehensible words. Dr. Erickson was on watch in the monitoring room. He called the other team members immediately. "You need to come right now. You have to see this." Within minutes, the entire team had gathered. What they saw on the screen stopped them all in their tracks. Elias's brain activity matched none of the known sleep phases. The high-frequency waves were associated with consciousness and high-level cognitive function. But activity of this intensity had never previously been documented. "This looks almost like the kind of activity that has been theorized in telepathy research," murmured Dr. Lundquist. "As though the brain is receiving a stream of information from an external source." "Don't be absurd," said Birdman sharply. "Telepathy is not a scientifically proven phenomenon. There must be a rational explanation for this." At that precise moment, Elias began to speak. But this time he was not murmuring. He was speaking clearly and fluently. And the language he was speaking was one that none of the team recognized. Dr. Johansson immediately switched on his tape recorder. Elias spoke in this unknown language for approximately 10 minutes. Then he suddenly switched to Swedish and began reciting a series of mathematical equations. Dr. Erickson began taking rapid notes. The equations related to the field of nuclear physics and were considerably in advance of the known theories of that era. Elias was describing concepts in nuclear reactions and particle physics that at the time were discussed only in the most advanced research laboratories. When morning came, Elias woke and said he remembered nothing. He had no knowledge of having spoken or learned anything during the night. But when he saw the equations that Dr. Erickson had noted down over breakfast, he paused. "Yes, that's correct," he said, "but it's incomplete." And he added several more lines to the paper, completing the equations. This first night of observation was both illuminating and profoundly unsettling for the team. It was clear that Elias was receiving information from an unknown source during sleep. But what was the source of that information? Was there a scientific explanation? Or did one need to turn to more esoteric theories? The trail of the stars. Over the following weeks, the team deepened their investigation. Elias underwent a variety of tests: memory tests, language ability assessments, mathematical problem solving, visual spatial skills, and many other cognitive evaluations. Every test confirmed the child's extraordinary abilities. One particularly notable test was designed by Dr. Lundquist. The astronomer showed Elias a series of star catalogs and asked the child to mark the locations of star systems he claimed had not yet been discovered. Without hesitation, Elias indicated several specific coordinates. "These regions are missing," he said, pointing at the catalog. "There are stars here, but no one has seen them yet. And this," he said, pointing to another location, "this is very important. There is life here." Dr. Lundquist noted down the coordinates Elias had indicated and consulted colleagues in the university's astronomy department. The coordinates lay beyond the range achievable by the telescopes of the day, so direct verification was not possible. But one colleague suggested reanalyzing some data obtained from previous observations. This analysis produced a startling result. In some of the regions Elias had indicated, previously unnoticed light anomalies existed. This suggested the possibility of unknown celestial bodies in those locations. "This cannot be a simple coincidence," said Dr. Lundquist, sharing the findings with the team. "Elias appears to genuinely be accessing astronomical knowledge that has not yet been discovered." Dr. Erickson went further still. He compared the equations Elias had spoken in his sleep with the nuclear physics theories of the day. "These equations are beyond our current theories," he said, "but they are mathematically consistent. And what's more interesting is that they point toward a new approach in the field of nuclear fusion." The team had reached an impasse. What was the source of Elias's knowledge? How could a 5-year-old child be offering solutions to problems that the world's most brilliant scientists had not yet managed to solve? One evening, the team members gathered in the university cafeteria to discuss these questions. Perhaps Elias has acquired this knowledge through ordinary channels, said Dr. Bergman, attempting to offer a rational explanation. Perhaps he has a special memory and can recall everything he has ever seen or heard. How does that explain the astronomical coordinates? Asked Dr. Lundquist. How could he have had access to that information? Or the nuclear physics equations, added Dr. Erickson. Those equations go beyond current research. Dr. Johansson was quiet for a long time. Then he began speaking. What if Elias is telling the truth? What if they really are giving him this information? Who could they be? A silence fell around the table. These kinds of theories were typically met with skepticism in the scientific environment of the 1970s. But the Elias case was so far outside ordinary experience that they were compelled to entertain extraordinary explanations. There is also a Cold War dimension to consider, said Professor Nielsen, breaking the silence. You know that both the Americans and the Soviets are running classified research programs into psychic phenomena. If Elias's abilities are genuine, this will attract the attention of the great powers. The team shuddered at the thought. The 1970s were one of the most intense periods of the Cold War. Both the United States and the Soviet Union were running secret programs aimed at using paranormal phenomena, including psychic abilities and remote viewing, for intelligence purposes. We must protect Elias, said Maria, with growing anxiety. My son is not a test subject or a weapon. He is only a child. International attention and danger. 2 months after the first investigations began, the Elias case attracted unexpected international attention. Rumors spread first through Swedish scientific circles. Then brief articles began appearing in academic journals across Northern Europe. And finally, scientists from both the United States and the Soviet Union began sending requests to observe and test Elias. Professor Nielsen resisted these requests. Elias is not a laboratory animal, he said in an official statement. He is a 5-year-old child, and his well-being is our priority. Our research is continuing, and results will be shared through appropriate channels at the appropriate time. But political pressure was mounting. The Swedish government, mindful of the delicate balances of the Cold War, advised Nielsen to proceed diplomatically. A compromise was eventually reached. Elias could be observed by a small delegation of scientists from America and the Soviet Union, but only under the supervision of the Swedish team and for a limited period. In March 1972, this international delegation arrived in Stockholm. The American team was led by Dr. Robert Mitchell, a child psychology professor at Stanford University. There were also rumored connections to the CIA. The Soviet team was led by Dr. Ivan Petrov, a neurophysiologist at Moscow State University with known links to the KGB. The first meeting took place in the main conference hall of Stockholm University. The room was filled with some of the world's sharpest minds, but the atmosphere was tense. The shadow of the Cold War fell across scientific curiosity. After the presentation, Elias and his mother were brought into the hall. The child looked somewhat intimidated by the mass of unfamiliar faces, but he settled with the reassuring presence of Maria at his side. He greeted the guests and repeated some of the skills he had demonstrated in earlier tests, solving complex mathematical problems in his head, speaking short sentences in various languages, offering information about astronomical coordinates. The American and Soviet scientists were astonished by what they witnessed. Over the following hours, each team had the opportunity to ask Elias questions. The questions generally appeared innocent: mathematics problems, memory tests, language assessments. But experienced eyes could detect the military and intelligence purposes underlying some of them. At one point, Dr. Mitchell asked, "Elias, have you ever been able to hear what other people are thinking?" The child shook his head. "No, I only hear them. They come at night and they tell me things." "And who are they, Elias?" asked Dr. Petrov in a calm but insistent voice. "I don't know," said Elias. "I can't see them. I only hear their voices, sometimes like music, sometimes like speech, but it's clear. They tell me everything: stars, numbers, languages." Have these voices ever told you about the future? Asked Dr. Mitchell, lowering his voice. Maria immediately intervened. I think that's quite enough. My son is tired. Professor Nielsen was on his feet at once. Yes, that will be all for today. We'll continue tomorrow. The first day ended there, but at midnight the telephone rang in Professor Nielsen's hotel room. The caller was his colleague, Dr. Johansson. Anders, there's a problem. Someone has broken into the laboratory. All of Elias's test records have been disturbed and some files are missing. Nielsen cursed. Who did this? I don't know, but I have suspicions. Both the Americans and the Soviets place enormous value on this information. Nielsen immediately called Maria and explained the situation. I'm worried, Maria. Elias's safety may be at risk. What should we do? What can we do? Maria asked, frightened. I think you need to disappear for a while. I'll arrange a safe place for you. The following morning, when the American and Soviet delegations arrived at the university, they were met with shocking news. Elias and his mother had left Stockholm in the middle of the night. Their whereabouts were unknown. Dr. Mitchell turned furiously to Professor Nielsen. How could you do this? You have sabotaged an international scientific collaboration. Elias's safety is more important than anything else, said Nielsen calmly. And it appears that certain individuals are placing that safety in jeopardy. Our files have been broken into. Information has been stolen. Is that an accusation? Asked Dr. Petrov in a cold voice. Simply a statement of fact. And at this moment, I myself do not know where Elias is. This is for his and his mother's safety. The secret refuge. The international delegations returned home in disappointment, but the reverberations of the event continued. Both the American and Soviet governments sent diplomatic notes to Sweden requesting information about Elias's situation. The world press had caught wind of the story, and headlines were appearing everywhere. Where is the genius child? In reality, Elias and Maria had been settled in a remote mountain cabin in northern Sweden. Only Dr. Sofia Bergman and Dr. Mia Lundqvist were with them. The two scientists were there both to continue Elias's education and to keep him safe. Elias continued to demonstrate his extraordinary abilities even in this isolated environment. Dr. Lundqvist kept documenting his astronomical predictions. Dr. Bergman closely monitored the child's psychological development. Is he still hearing them at night? Dr. Bergman asked Maria one evening. Yes, said Maria with a worried expression, and his knowledge is growing steadily. It's not just astronomy and physics anymore. He's also receiving information about medicine, biology, even history. Last night he was talking about an ancient civilization, a civilization that lived on Earth and vanished completely, one that isn't mentioned in any history book. Dr. Bergman took notes. And he still can't explain where this knowledge comes from. No, he always gives the same answer. They tell me. The days in the mountain cabin passed in a calm routine. In the mornings, Elias received standard educational instruction, reading, writing, basic mathematics. In the afternoons, Dr. Lundqvist made astronomical observations with him, and Dr. Bergman conducted psychological assessments. In the evenings, Elias listened to the books his mother read aloud or went for walks in the natural surroundings. At night, as always, his brain activity was monitored, and every night the same extraordinary pattern was observed: high-frequency waves, incomprehensible murmurings, and new knowledge he had no memory of when morning came. This calm routine continued for 6 months, but in October 1972, an unexpected visitor arrived. Dr. Eric Johansson reached the cabin in a state of agitation. He brought alarming news. America and the Soviets have located Elias, he said, breathless. Agents from both countries have been spotted in this area. Professor Nielsen says you need to move immediately. They prepared quickly and left the cabin under cover of darkness. Elias, his mother, and the 2 doctors got into Johansson's car and headed south. Their destination was a small fishing village on Sweden's western coast. From there, they would cross to Denmark by boat. The journey was tense. At every moment there was the fear of being followed. Elias, however, was remarkably calm throughout. Why does everyone want to know about me so much? He asked in an innocent voice. Dr. Bergman smiled gently at the child. Because you are a very special boy, Elias, and some people want to use your special abilities for their own purposes. But why? I'm only learning. They tell me and I learn. This question preoccupied the adults in the car. Elias's situation raised questions that went deeper than his ability. What was the source of the knowledge? What were the limits of the human mind? And perhaps most importantly, how might an ability like this change the world? A new beginning in Geneva. In Denmark, Professor Hans Jensen of the University of Copenhagen was waiting for them. Jensen was an old colleague and trusted friend of Nielsen. He settled them in a farmhouse outside the city. "You'll be safe here," said Jensen, "at least for a while. But in the long term, we need to find a more permanent solution." The permanent solution came from an unexpected direction. A week later, Professor Nielsen arrived in Copenhagen with a proposal that astonished everyone. "I have been in contact with UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. They are proposing to treat Elias's situation as an international scientific research project. This would involve the participation of all interested nations, including both America and the Soviet Union. But most importantly, Elias's safety and well-being will be guaranteed." Maria asked carefully, "How can we trust that?" "The agreement contains very strict conditions," said Nielsen. "No invasive tests will be performed on Elias. All research will take place under your supervision, and you will have the right to withdraw from the program at any time." After a long silence, Maria nodded. "Very well, but I will be with my son at every step, and if anything troubles me, we leave immediately." And so the international research program that would become known as the Elias Project officially began. The city of Geneva, Switzerland, was chosen as the project's base, neutral ground where scientists from across the world could gather to examine Elias's abilities. Elias and Maria settled in Geneva. They lived in a small, pleasant apartment, trying to maintain as normal a family life as possible. Elias went to a special laboratory in the UNESCO building on certain days each week and participated in various tests. The tests were now far more comprehensive and systematic. The information Elias absorbed during the night was verified by experts from around the world. His astronomical predictions were checked against the world's most powerful telescopes. His physics equations were analyzed by theoretical physicists. The results were astonishing each time. A large proportion of his astronomical predictions were confirmed as telescope technology developed. His physics equations were theoretically consistent, and some contained ideas that went beyond the science of the day. And linguistic analysis showed that some of the foreign languages Elias had spoken during his sleep matched no known language on Earth. In early 1973, the research team published its first official report. The report documented Elias's abilities in detail, but reached no definitive conclusion about the source of those abilities. Several possible theories were presented. The genetic mutation theory. There might be an as yet unidentified genetic variation in Elias's brain, enabling him to process and store information in an extraordinary way. The cryptomnesia theory. Elias might be retrieving information from his subconscious, information he had previously encountered without consciously registering it. The psi phenomenon theory. The child might possess some form of telepathy or remote viewing. And finally, the possibility that Elias was exactly right, that his knowledge was genuinely arriving from an unknown external source, one not yet scientifically identified. The report generated major debate in the scientific community, but it attracted the most attention for what it said about the accuracy of the information Elias provided. His knowledge in the fields of astronomy and physics was confirmed again and again. Whatever the source of that knowledge, the knowledge itself was clearly valuable. The voice of the future. Elias was still a 5-year-old child in the midst of all this interest and debate. He spent his days as other children did, playing, reading, exploring the natural world. Maria was careful to ensure her son experienced as normal a childhood as possible. But Elias's continuing nocturnal contact with them strained the boundaries of the ordinary. By now, it was not only scientific matters, he was also receiving and sharing information about philosophy, ethics, and events yet to come. One night, during a sleep study conducted under Dr. Bergman's supervision, Elias suddenly sat up in bed and began speaking clearly. "In 1986, there will be a nuclear disaster, Chernobyl. Thousands of people will be affected. And in 2001, the Twin Towers will fall. The world will change. Dr. Bergman recorded these words and asked Elias about them in the morning. As always, the child had no memory of what he had said in the night. These kinds of future predictions created a profound ethical dilemma for the research team. If the predictions were accurate, the knowledge they contained could change the world. But disclosing them could cause panic and chaos. And there was a deeper question still. Was the future fixed? If these disasters were known in advance, could they be prevented? After lengthy debate, the UNESCO committee decided that predictions relating to the future would be kept classified until they occurred. This information would be communicated only to the highest levels of authority and used to take whatever preventive measures might be possible. This decision troubled Dr. Lundquist particularly. This is contrary to scientific ethics, she protested. Concealing knowledge is directly opposed to the fundamental principles of science. But this isn't only about science, said Professor Nielsen. It's also about social responsibility. Think what would happen if all of Elias's predictions were made public. Panic, fear, perhaps chaos. And perhaps these predictions aren't accurate. Perhaps they are simply the imaginings of a child's mind. The debate remained unresolved, but a selection of Elias's predictions about the future was stored in a classified file accessible only to authorized individuals. Meanwhile, his other abilities continued to develop. By the age of 6, he could speak 8 different languages fluently. At 7, he began developing original theories in quantum physics. At 8, he designed and built his own telescope, a design far in advance of the technology of the time. But as Elias grew, a new phenomenon began to emerge. The child said he was starting to hear them during the day as well. They talk to me all the time now, Elias said when he reached the age of 9. They tell me everything. Sometimes it's too much. My head hurts. Dr. Bergman greeted this development with alarm. This could be a risk to Elias's psychological health. Being under constant bombardment of information, particularly for a developing mind, could be extremely stressful. EEG recordings showed that the child's brain activity was growing progressively more intense. Elias had begun experiencing headaches and sleep disturbances. Perhaps this ability demands a kind of price, thought Johansson. No human brain can sustain a flow of information this intense indefinitely. Speaking to them. By the time he turned 10, Elias was receiving information almost continuously. The child had begun speaking about theoretical physics, multidimensional mathematical models, and concepts that lay beyond the reach of human language. His drawings had changed as well. Where he had previously drawn stars, planets, and mathematical models, he was now producing incomprehensible symbols and complex multidimensional structures. One day, Dr. Lundquist asked Elias about one of the drawings. "What is this, Elias?" The child studied the drawing for a long moment. Then he spoke in a quiet voice. "This is the true structure of the universe. Dimensions, time, energy, all of it is here. But it's hard to explain. There are no words for it in your language." By the time he turned 11, the situation had reached a critical point. He was now hearing their voices almost continuously, and this was seriously disrupting his daily life. He could not concentrate on schoolwork, was struggling to form social relationships, and could no longer sleep properly through the night. The research team gathered with growing concern. "Elias's condition is deteriorating," said Dr. Bergman, reviewing the latest psychological assessment reports. "He's showing signs of stress. There are even some dissociative symptoms. It's as though he's losing his connection to reality." "The brain scans are also alarming," added Dr. Johansson. "There is excessive activity in certain regions of the brain, particularly in the temporal lobe. This could be a sign of certain neurological disorders." Maria observed the changes in her son every day and felt helpless. "He's becoming distant even from me," she said, her eyes filled with tears. "He seems to be living in another world, and he's drifting further and further away." Professor Nielsen drew a deep breath. "Perhaps the time has come to stop this research. Elias's health matters more than anything." But at that very moment, something unexpected happened. Elias went to his mother one morning and spoke to her in a calm voice. "I want to talk to them, face to face." "Who do you want to talk to, sweetheart?" asked Maria in astonishment. "The voices, the ones who give me knowledge. I have questions for them." When the research team heard Elias's request, they were both surprised and intrigued. Perhaps this was an opportunity to better understand the child's situation. Dr. Lundquist proposed an idea. We could arrange for Elias to enter a kind of meditative or trance state in a controlled environment. Perhaps through this he could establish more direct contact with them, and we could observe that contact. The idea was discussed and eventually accepted. Every precaution would be taken for Elias's safety, medical supervision would be in place, and at the first sign of any problem, the experiment would be immediately terminated. The designated day arrived. Elias was brought into the room. Maria was beside her son, holding his hand tightly. The research team had taken up their positions in the monitoring room. Everyone was tense, and everyone was curious. "Are you ready, Elias?" asked Dr. Bergman, leaning to the child's eye level. Elias nodded calmly. "I'm ready. I want to talk to them." Dr. Bergman guided the child toward a light trance state, deep breathing exercises, calming visualizations. Elias quickly passed into a calm and focused condition. His eyes were open, but he appeared to be looking somewhere else entirely. "Can you hear them, Elias?" asked Dr. Bergman in a gentle voice. "Yes," said Elias. His voice was slightly different from usual, deeper. "The same as always, but clearer now. Ask them the questions you want to ask." Elias closed his eyes and concentrated. A deep silence fell over the room. Then the child began to speak, but this time not in his own voice, in a deeper, more adult voice. "Why me? Why are you giving me this knowledge?" A brief silence. Then Elias began to answer himself, but his voice had changed completely. It was as though someone else were speaking through him. "You are a bridge, Elias, a bridge between two worlds. Your mind has the capacity to receive our knowledge, and humanity needs this knowledge." Suddenly, Elias's voice cut off, and the child began to tremble. The screens in the monitoring room began registering abnormal brain activity. His heart rate accelerated. "Terminate the experiment!" Dr. Bergman cried, running into the room. Maria rushed to her son's side. Elias was shaking violently. His eyes were open, but his pupils were dilated. He was having a seizure. The medical team intervened immediately. The child was given a sedative and his condition was stabilized. An hour later, Elias was calm and asleep. The Chernobyl warning. The research team gathered in the monitoring room. They were examining the EEG recordings and the data obtained during the seizure. "This is extraordinary," said Dr. Johansson, studying the screens. "Immediately before the seizure began, there was an activity pattern in Elias's brain that we have never seen before. The entire brain appeared to be vibrating at a single frequency. This matches no known neurological condition. And during the seizure, there was an incredible surge in gamma waves," added Dr. Erickson, "as though the brain was being bombarded with far more information than it could process." Professor Nilsson spoke thoughtfully. "We must not repeat this experiment. It is too great a risk to Elias's health." The team was unanimous. But when Elias woke, he said something that surprised them all. "I want to speak to them again. They were giving me important information, vital information for humanity." "Elias, this is very dangerous for you," said Maria with anxiety. "We are never going to do anything like that again." The child looked at his mother. In his eyes was a resolve that went far beyond his years. "Mom, you don't understand. They showed me something, a danger that humanity will soon face, and we can prevent it." These words profoundly shook the team. Elias had made predictions about future events before, but he had never spoken with this urgency or this gravity. "What kind of danger, Elias?" asked Professor Nilsson carefully. "I couldn't see it fully," said the child, "but it's very large and close. They wanted to give me more information, but the connection was broken." After lengthy discussions, a compromise was reached. Elias would be permitted to communicate with them again, but this time under much more carefully controlled conditions. More medical personnel would be present, more safety measures would be in place, and the experiment would be terminated at the first sign of any disturbance. The second attempt took place a week later. This time, Elias had been given a mild sedative. He sat in the same comfortable chair. Maria held his hand. Elias entered the trance state. He said he could hear them, and then, in that same deep, unfamiliar voice, he began to speak. "What is the danger you wanted to show me? What does humanity face?" He answered himself again, but the voice was completely different. A disaster is approaching. In 1986, a nuclear accident, Chernobyl. Thousands of people will be affected. And if precautions are not taken, there will be greater disasters still. The nuclear arms race is threatening the world. A miscalculation between the two superpowers, a single misunderstanding, and everything could come to an end. Elias began providing specific information: design flaws in nuclear reactors, deficiencies in safety protocols, potential risks. This information was extremely technical and advanced by the nuclear engineering standards of the day. Dr. Erickson was taking rapid notes. "This information is extraordinary," he whispered. "If it's accurate, it could save thousands of lives." For approximately 20 minutes, Elias continued transmitting information. Then he slowly returned to his normal voice and consciousness. This time there was no seizure, but he looked utterly exhausted. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" Maria asked with concern. "Yes, Mom," said Elias with a faint smile. "I'm just very tired, but they gave us important information, didn't they? Information that could save people." The research team immediately set to work analyzing what Elias had provided. Nuclear physicists and engineers examined the design flaws and safety risks the child had described, and astonishingly, much of this information was confirmed. There were indeed serious safety vulnerabilities in certain nuclear facilities, particularly in the Soviet Union. Through UNESCO, this information was communicated to the relevant governments. But in the tense atmosphere of the Cold War, the sharing and implementation of such knowledge was far from straightforward. Who are they? By 1976, Elias was 14 years old. Physically, he looked like any normal adolescent: tall, slender, blonde-haired, blue-eyed. But mentally, he was far beyond his years. During this period, Elias's communication with them took on a different dimension. He was no longer simply receiving knowledge, he was asking questions and conducting dialogues. And those dialogues were drifting toward increasingly philosophical and existential territory. During one session, Elias suddenly asked, "Who are you? Who are you really?" The answer came in that familiar, deep adult voice. "We are your future selves, the evolved form of humanity. Time is not linear as you understand it. We are what you have the potential to become, and we are guiding you so that you might create us." This explanation threw the research team into shock. Time travel, communication from the future. These ideas lay far beyond the scientific paradigm of the time. "How is this possible?" Elias asked. "The time paradoxes. Your understanding of time is limited," the voice replied. "Time is not like a river, it is more like an ocean. All possibilities, all potential futures exist simultaneously. We exist in one of those possibilities, and we are reaching out to you to increase the chance of that possibility being realized." "Why me?" Elias asked. "Why not others? You are special. Your brain, your mental structure is suited to communicate with us. There are some people, very few, like you. Throughout history, we have communicated with them as well. You have given them names, prophets, oracles, geniuses, but in reality, they were simply people capable of communicating with us." This explanation carried implications that were not only scientific but historical and theological as well. Elias's communication with them might also explain many of the mystical and religious phenomena of human history. The final choice. In 1977, an important diplomatic development was made possible by the information Elias had provided. The American and Soviet governments signed a new agreement on the control of nuclear weapons, made possible in part by the warnings and knowledge delivered through Elias. Security measures pointed to by the child had also begun to be implemented at certain nuclear facilities in the Soviet Union. But despite all these developments, Elias's health continued to be a source of concern. Being in constant contact with them was mentally and physically exhausting. In 1978, when Elias reached the age of 16, a turning point arrived. One day, the child turned to his mother and the research team. "They're telling me I need to go." "Go where?" Maria asked with alarm. "To them," said Elias in a calm voice. "There is much more they want to teach me, and here in this body with these limitations, I can no longer learn what needs to be learned." These words shocked everyone present. "What do you mean, Elias?" asked Professor Nilsson carefully. "Can you tell us exactly what they said?" Elias took a deep breath. "They say I have a choice to make. Either I remain here and continue living as I know it, or I join them completely, leaving my physical body behind." Maria wrapped her arms around her son, her eyes filled with tears. No, Elias, this sounds like a kind of suicide. No, Mom, said Elias gently. Not suicide. The next step. The next stage of evolution. They are waiting for me and they need me. My joining them is very important for the future of humanity. This conversation created a profound crisis for the research team. Was Elias's mental state deteriorating, or had he genuinely received an imitation of the kind he described? Emergency meetings were held. Experts assessed Elias's condition, but no definitive conclusion could be reached. The child's mental state matched no known psychological or neurological model. Throughout this period, far closer attention was paid to Elias's daily life. He was under continuous supervision. Yet Elias was entirely calm. He continued his normal daily activities, reading, listening to music, occasionally spending time with friends. The only difference was that distant, dreaming look in his eyes, as though he were perpetually in contact with somewhere else. One night, Elias went to his mother and held her. "I love you, Mom," he said softly. "I will always love you." Maria was slightly surprised by this sudden show of emotion, but she held him close. "I love you too, Elias, always." That night, Maria slept in the doorway of her son's room. She was afraid he might do something. But throughout the night, the child slept peacefully. When morning came, Maria went into his room to wake him. What she saw froze her in place. Elias was lying in his bed. His eyes were open. His face bore an expression of profound peace. But he was not breathing. His heart was not beating. Maria cried out for help. The medical team intervened immediately. Resuscitation attempts began. But despite every effort, they could not bring Elias back. The 16-year-old boy had died, technically in his sleep. The autopsy could not determine a cause of death. There was no sign of illness, trauma, or poisoning in Elias's body. His brain was entirely normal, at least physically. The official cause of death was recorded as natural causes, unexplained. The legacy continues. After Elias's death, strange events began to occur. Members of the research team at the UNESCO building claimed to hear Elias's voice on certain nights. Sometimes computers would switch on by themselves, and complex equations would appear on the screens, in Elias's handwriting. And most remarkably of all, children across various parts of the world began reporting that they had seen a child in their dreams. This child was teaching them about science, mathematics, physics, and astronomy. And every one of these children gave the same description: tall, slender, blonde-haired, blue-eyed. The Elias project was officially closed, and all records were moved to classified archives. But the influence of Elias endured. Thanks to the information he had provided, the scale of the Chernobyl disaster was limited. The nuclear arms race slowed. New medical treatments were developed. And perhaps most importantly, humanity began to reconsider the limits of its own potential. In the early 1980s, a series of events came to be known as the Elias phenomenon, attracting worldwide attention. Children from all corners of the globe were saying they had seen a blonde, blue-eyed boy in their dreams, and that this child had been teaching them complex scientific concepts. Most of these children knew nothing of Elias Lindbergh. His story had been kept classified, but some of them began to exhibit extraordinary abilities, solving complex mathematical problems, developing physics theories, making astronomical predictions, and they all pointed to the same source of their knowledge, the blonde boy in their dreams. UNESCO and other international organizations began covertly investigating this phenomenon. The former members of the Elias Project team were assigned to examine these new cases. Dr. Sophia Bergman, Dr. Mia Lundqvist, and Dr. Eric Johansson traveled the world to study the cases of what they came to call the Elias children. Maria Lindbergh left her Geneva apartment after her son's death and returned to her old home in northern Sweden. She began living there quietly and in isolation. But when news of the Elias phenomenon reached her, she resumed contact with the research team. "My son is alive," Maria told Dr. Bergman. "In another form, in another dimension, but alive, and still trying to help us." In 1985, one of the most important warnings Elias had ever given was confirmed. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster occurred, but because of the information Elias had provided years earlier, certain safety measures had been put in place. The scale of the disaster was limited compared to the worst possible scenario. This event confirmed once again the accuracy of the data produced by the Elias project, and world leaders began, in secret, to take Elias's other predictions and warnings considerably more seriously. In 2001, another event that Elias had predicted years earlier came to pass: the September 11th attacks. He had said the Twin Towers would fall and the world would change. When these two proved accurate, his abilities were brought back into the center of global attention. That same year, Maria Lindbergh passed away at the age of 72. Before her death, she had written a book titled Elias's Legacy, telling her son's story from her own perspective. The book became a worldwide bestseller and brought Elias's story to a far wider audience. The Elias Foundation, established in 1995 under Maria's guidance, continued to support children showing exceptional abilities, providing educational opportunities, and helping them to develop their gifts. Its purpose was to carry on Elias's legacy and to ensure that children like him would not have to face the difficulties he had faced. In 2005, some of the Elias Project's still classified documents were released to the public under Sweden's 30-year rule. These documents showed that Elias's situation had been far more complex than had initially been appreciated. One figure in particular drew attention: 83% of the information Elias had provided had been confirmed. This was a rate far beyond what chance or random guessing could explain. By 2010, the Elias phenomenon had taken on a global dimension. Thousands of people across the world were claiming to have made some kind of contact with Elias. These people communicated with one another online, sharing their experiences and comparing the information they had received. The Center for Human Potential Research collected this information systematically, and an intriguing pattern began to emerge. Different people in different locations, unaware of one another, were receiving similar information. This knowledge was generally scientific, philosophical, or spiritual in nature, and often related to current events or events in the near future. Dr. Chen, who had himself been one of the Elias children as a boy and was now in his 40s a successful theoretical physicist, developed the collective consciousness network theory to explain the phenomenon. Elias was a node in this network, he explained at a conference. He was not merely receiving information, he was also expanding and strengthening the network. And after his death, the network continued to expand. Now more people can connect to it. In 2015, on the 37th anniversary of Elias's death, a remarkable event took place across the world. On the same night, in different countries and different time zones, thousands of people claimed to have had the same dream. Elias was giving them a message. It was expressed in different words in every language, but its essence was the same. Our time is running short. Climate crisis, wars, diseases, the threats facing humanity are multiplying. But there is hope. By connecting to one another, by elevating our collective consciousness, we can overcome these threats. I am with you. We are all together. The legacy of Elias. At a special conference held in 2022 on the 44th anniversary of Elias's death, the Center for Human Potential Research brought together scientists, philosophers, spiritual leaders, and thousands of people who had experienced the Elias phenomenon from around the world. Dr. Chen made a significant announcement. After years of research and experience, we have a theory about who they are. As Elias said, they may be our future selves, but more specifically, they are the evolved form of collective human consciousness, a kind of superconsciousness, a being that exists beyond time and space and has been communicating with us throughout history through various channels. This theory is consistent with what Elias said all those years ago. By 2025, the Elias phenomenon had become not merely a paranormal case, but a scientific and spiritual paradigm offering a new understanding of human potential and consciousness. The process Elias set in motion years ago had become a catalyst for the collective evolution of humanity. Elias himself continues to live on as a legend, a symbol, and perhaps a guide. His story reminds us that the limits of human consciousness are far wider than we have imagined, and that humanity has only just begun to discover its collective potential. And perhaps, as Elias said all those years ago, we and they are in truth the same being, existing at different levels of time and consciousness, but one at the core. And perhaps humanity's true future lies in understanding and experiencing that oneness fully. When Elias Lindberg arrived from a small Swedish town at Stockholm University in 1972, no one could have anticipated that he would affect human history so profoundly. The extraordinary abilities of a 5-year-old child caused humanity to reconsider its own potential, and perhaps that process of reconsideration was the beginning of humanity's next stage of evolution. As you have listened to Elias's story today, ask yourself, what are the limits of your own consciousness? Can you hear them too? Perhaps all of us have the potential to be like Elias. Perhaps within each of us there is a gift capable of understanding the secrets of the universe, of communicating beyond time and space. And perhaps our true growth begins with the discovery of that potential. If this video gave you something to think about, and if you enjoy stories about human consciousness, paranormal phenomena, and the mysteries that resist explanation, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Share your own thoughts and experiences in the comments, because perhaps they are always there, waiting to be heard. Until the next video.